Hi, I'm Caitlin Tiller and this is Just Causes. We're a program about campaigners and activists who lobby and agitate for positive change. It wasn't that long ago that a university education was free to Australian citizens. Now though, deciding whether to go to uni is one of the biggest financial commitments a young person will make. But who's watching out for the interests of our students?
Education is big business. But as universities transform themselves into corporations, higher education is becoming accessible only to those who can afford it. Even then, many students get lost in the system with little or no support, despite the investment they've made to secure their future.
The National Union of Students doesn't particularly help individuals. What we do though is support individual guilds, and individual guilds provide pastoral care and education representation to members.
Established in 1937, the National Union of Students' mission is to protect the rights of university students.
We're a national body that represents students, so there's no equivalent, and education issues are a federal issue. So without a national body, we wouldn't be able to lobby the government at a national level.
The recent government announcement of a $2.8 billion cut to university funding has only highlighted the enormity of the issues facing the NUS.
This is the biggest blow to education that we have seen in our lifetime, and it will affect us as students now, but it's also going to affect the generation of students to come.
Stuart Bunt is with the National Tertiary Education Union, which represents academics.
Any society that hopes to be productive in the long term needs to invest in its universities, and we are one of the lowest in the OECD in terms of how much we invest in our universities, and one of the highest, and again this is where we have a lot of sympathy with student problems. We get the most money out of our students of almost any of the OECD universities.
He says it's crucial the NTEU and the NUS work together to stop profit getting in the way of education.
I think the thing is that collective action and collective support is essential nowadays. Increasingly there's a big division between those in power, those with wealth and those without.
Curtin Student Guild President Jess McLeod is working as an affiliate of the NUS to oppose the recent cuts.
We're going to have meetings, rallies, we'll have petitions that we get people to sign. We'll be working with the staff union, the NTU, trying to coordinate to oppose the cuts.
While individual guilds are fighting the cuts on the front line, the NUS is lobbying for government recognition of these issues.
A great majority of what we do is about lobbying and running campaigns for the interests of students.
Curtin Student Guild absolutely opposes the cuts that have been announced by the federal government, and in fact we condemn the Gillard government for these cuts, and we're determined to be involved with students from other campuses in fighting them.
The pressure isn't only on students, with staff carrying the burden of larger class sizes, affecting their ability to provide quality education.
It's putting a lot of stress on people, and in fact in our university a lot of people are voting with their feet, have just decided it's too hard.
In 2012, Curtin University abolished 338 courses, streams and majors. This was before the government's recent announcement.
I think it's very important at a time when the university sector is facing the most serious cuts that we've faced for 17 years. It's very important to have and national coordination.
Curtin University Vice-Chancellor Jeanette Hackett has stated that classes with low enrolments will be slashed.
I believe that there will be further cuts in the future, going on the information that we've received from the university.
For specialised courses, this is all but a signed and stamped death certificate. But the NUS and its members refuse to sit idly by and are dedicated to protecting the interests of students. However, to make an impact, they say they need greater student backing.
I mean, I repeatedly hear from students, there's nothing worth fighting for anymore, which practically makes me faint.
A recent protest in Perth on the National Day of Action was poorly attended.
I mean, we were starting from a very flat place, but even so, the turnout was surprisingly low.
Some, like the University of Western Australia, are trialling broader courses for students, meaning more years studying at a greater expense. The government calls the new system demand-driven. On average, a student in 2010 would take nearly 8 years to pay off their debt. Despite recent setbacks, the NUS and the student guilds around Australian universities say they will never give up the fight.
And it is crucial that we work together with students, have a broad campaign that involves as many students as possible and across as many university campuses as possible.
The NUS say now is the time for students to take action against the implementation of course streamlining.
It really undermines the quality of our education, and it's going to significantly increase our debt. So take action, because there can't be anything far more important than this.
With us to talk more about this issue are Sam Cavallaro from the Curtin Student Guild and Stephen McCallum from the NUS. Sam, might students of Generation Y be underestimating how important these issues are to them?
I think students generally, they might not have heard about the cuts, but you know, when we were doing things like building for the May 14th student strike, it was really good to see that students, once hearing about it, actually took up the issues and seemed to really care about the things that were happening.
Stephen, what's your take on that?
I think Sam hit the nail on the head, but I think it's an issue that's exhibited in broader society. It's not just Generation Y that suffers from these issues. If you explain, for example, climate change to the average person, they're usually quite happy to get involved in some kind of action to make their own homes more energy efficient. It's the same across all spectrums of society, and I think it's a systemic issue that our political system is making people more apathetic and less able to engage.
Well, when it comes to students in general, do you think there's a perception that they are passive?
Well, I think there's a bit of a perception growing that students are passive, but I think the sort of passivity that students actually are, might show is more about the fact that student unions and any sort of show of activism or radicalism has actually been destroyed through things like the introduction of the voluntary student unionism, which was introduced by the Howard government. But also, just the fact that the two major parties, the Labor government and the Liberal Party, they don't seem to show any clear representative of students' rights or things that students could engage with. And I think there might be a passivity that comes out of that because there's no one showing a lead of things that students actually want to fight for and actually want to engage with.
And Stephen, when it comes to the NUS, do you think there's a case for the NUS to have to reinvigorate themselves?
Yeah, I think we're definitely in the process of reinvigoration now. We had somewhat of a lull over a couple of years, but we're coming out fighting again. The national response to the Emerson cuts on education are a great example of that, where thousands of students rallied in cities all over Australia.
Do you agree with that, Sam?
Yeah, I think it's a really good thing that the NUS has taken up the cuts to higher education so wholeheartedly. And I think it's really good to see that students are engaging with student politics again. As I was saying before, there's been a general lull in students fighting for their rights, but seeing that students could come out and protest, especially at Curtin, to see 700 students come out, it was really heartening to see that people are really taking up these issues, and I think the lead shown by the NUS has really helped to be able to encourage students to do that.
Stephen, we all saw a couple of years ago the Occupy movement really captured the imagination of students. Do you think there's a way the NUS can tap into that?
Yeah, well, I think the Occupy movement has tapped into NUS in a sense because student occupations have been happening for years and years. In fact, Flinders University hold the record for the longest student sit-in in the Southern Hemisphere still. So I think these are skills that lie within the student movement still, and I think they're skills that will be used in upcoming actions.
Sam, how concerned are you when it comes to the consequences of the government continually hacking into the funding of tertiary education?
Well, I think it's definitely a big problem. I mean, I think it's a problem in terms of the quality of education all round in the entire country, and also about equity issues of students being able to access higher education. But it's also problems for students who are currently enrolled in places like Curtin, where continually to take money out of higher education actually means that more and more students are made to bear the load of paying for education, which is a socially valuable necessity. More and more students are made to pay for education, and therefore it's you know, making it a user-pay system and much more like a corporation or a business. And I think we can really see those sort of problems coming out at Curtin right now.
Well, Sam, Stephen, thanks for joining us today on Just Causes.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Upheaval and transformation have followed Akram Azimi all his life. After escaping war in his native Afghanistan and refugee camps in Pakistan, Akram has spent the past 15 years in Australia, building an amazing reputation as a social justice campaigner. He is currently Young Australian of the Year, and while his interests are diverse, his passion is reconciliation with our Indigenous community. For Just Causes, I'm Caitlin Tiller.
I believe Akram's story is one of the major reasons to why it can relate so well to Indigenous people, is because many Aboriginal people through the Stolen Generation, things like that, had a similar story to what Akram's been through, and I think that's why he so easily relates to Indigenous people, and it's why his passion is helping Indigenous peoples.
When your life's in danger, you do not consult a compass. You just pick a direction and you run, and that's exactly what we did. I was born in the middle of a civil war in Afghanistan, and the circumstances of my birth are rather unusual too, because the moment I was born, a car bomb went off outside. Can you imagine? Outside a maternal hospital, somebody had put a bomb. Now that's the kind of madness in which Afghanistan found itself in that crazy civil war. Arriving in Peshawar was quite a horrific experience, because for all its problems, Kabul was still a relatively developed city. I remember my mum made sure we were in this line, and eventually we made it inside the little tent, and there was this old lady, this old Pakistani lady, and she put my head back and 2 little drops went in my mouth. And then about 5 years later on, I'm in UN biology in Australia, and I learn about vaccines, and then just the penny drops. And then we go forward another 10 years. And I'm working on End of the Polio campaign. In one sense, I do all the social justice work for a very selfish reason, because it makes me feel good for a very long time.
I know that Akram has achieved an award for dedicating a lot of hard work towards the young Indigenous Australians up in the Kimberley.
About 7 years ago, I was asked to go to the Kimberley, to this beautiful little town called Luma. It's about 200 kilometers east of Broome. I didn't know how to communicate with those kids. I was telling them stories of ancient Greek mythology. I just realized, my God, here I am, an Afghan Australian, a common law trained lawyer, telling ancient Greek stories in English to kids in the Kimberley. And then when I came back, when I heard statistics about Indigenous Australians, for me those statistics now had a human face. I saw the faces of those little boys. How can you sit by and let that happen? And a few friends and myself, including my Noongar friends, we said we have to do something about it. And really that's probably where the seeds for I'm the Other were planted.
I think Akram is really passionate about the organisation and about reconciliation, and that's how he's made a difference. Like, just being so passionate, and everyone he meets can sense that passion, and he gets them involved, and is having this profile with the Young Australian has helped, I suppose, build I'm the Other's reputation. So that's how he's helped, and just everyone who gets involved sees his passion and they become passionate as well.
There are a lot of conversations about Indigenous Australians, but there are very few conversations with Indigenous Australians that we're having right now, and that is what I'm the Other is addressing. What really warms my heart and says something about our Australian character is that somebody who looks like me could have been chosen as the Young Australian of the Year.
I definitely think Akram deserves it for all his hard work and dedication that he's put in, not just for myself, but for the young Indigenous Australians up in the Kimberley. Akram has helped me to achieve a better confidence in public speaking, and also writing of speeches for public speaking.
Some days are so busy that I actually don't have time to go home. So what I do is I work in my little office in anthropology. I work on my desk all day, and then get under the desk during the night, sleep there, wake up, and then start that all over again. Come to realize that satisfaction in life comes from the fulfillment of our obligations. That is to say, it is only through service to your community do you find self-satisfaction. And I think we need to move beyond this paradigm that somehow we need to help Indigenous Australians. Closing the gap will never be like this. We cannot expect Indigenous Australians just to do this. It must be like this. As my friend Dylan Collard says, we must be ready to meet each other. There's a good possibility that with the work that I'm doing right now, I may never see its benefits. It's not the size of the giving that matters. It is simply the act itself.